Enlightened False Consciousness. And this is going to tie into so many different things, which I'm keen to talk about. So another interesting line of post-Marxist thought can be found in the work of Zizek, who put forward an interesting explanation of why grand theories like Marxism could exercise the hold they did, even when, as in the case of the Soviet Empire, in its later stages, it was plain that the theory was not delivering on its promises. Zizek's argument was that those living under a regime convinced themselves to believe in the theory's claim in some sense, even when in the back of their mind they knew these to be false. So basically, people that were living under communism or understand a Marxist understanding of the world, there are people that analyze and said, Marxism isn't working, right? And however, there's people within that society can accept that it's not working, but they're just going with the flow anyway. Like in the back of their mind, they know it's not working, but they have just accepted that, okay, this is just the status quo, right? This is a specific example of communism, Marxism, but this can easily transfer into our own context, which we'll get into a bit later. And so this was a condition he called um, enlightened false consciousness, and it was to be seen as a coping strategy. It's really important. Like, I know this could probably tie into psychoanalytical discussion about, or you can use the temperaments. When it comes to understanding that there are things we don't want to confront and are too uncomfortable for us to confront, that it may force us to change our lives, and we don't want to go down that route. So we have different coping strategies. So to admit that the theory was completely wrong would be psychologically devastating, as one had no apparent way of escaping its controlling power in everyday life. They know that they're following an illusion, but still they are doing it. Okay, so it is this distrust of grand theory. So in this case, enlightened false consciousness is describing that in the case of Zizek's talking about the context of what was it? Soviet Empire. The grand theory within Marxism is about the world heading from a certain way of living, from feudal system to capitalism, etc. I think there's a few steps to capitalism, to at the end is Marxism or communism, right? And that's the grand theory that Marxists lay out. That's the trajectory of the world when it comes to how societies are built. So it is this distrust of grand theory, in this case, the Marxist grand theory, and its authoritarian bias that can be considered the distinguishing feature of postmodern philosophy, which maintains a libertarian attitude towards its various expressions. So in some sense, postmodern philosophy wants to do away with that authoritarian understanding. And this unfortunately shapes the understanding of Islam in some sense. Like many of them, it comes across in the book as well. In the book, it talks about how, it's like, the rise of the Taliban, for example, we've talked about in, I think, the first class we did on this book. It's authoritarian in nature and therefore ... right? But we would argue against that, obviously, right? Because that we would argue, probably we can argue from many angles. The angle I'd argue from is that it is fighting the system, the American military industrial complex, and these jihadist movements are forming as a result of fighting back at the system and the American hegemony, right? So it can be used in a liberating manner. But anyways, that's the understanding sometimes can be, oh no, that they're going to enforce Islam onto the people in a certain way and dictate how they act and whatnot. But that's a different conversation. So does that make sense? Do you have any questions before I can't tie in our context of the enlightened false consciousness?
No, thanks. Keen to listen to more.
Yeah, so essentially the idea is enlightened false consciousness. We know something doesn't work. We have accepted deep down in our psyche, in the back of our mind, that this way of life or this thing isn't working. And however, because we live in that society, we're just immersed in that society. We're just going about our life regardless in status quo manner. So there's a schism, right? There's a disconnect between what you actually think versus what you're doing. And I think you can really tie this into Islam as well. Like intentions versus actions. As a Muslim, we should, have pure intentions and act on those intentions, right? So if you want to do good deeds, you want to have the intention, you want to do this for the sake of Allah, and then your action is like what flows from the intention, right? So similarly here, you know something's not working, but you're just like, okay, and then go about your life in a certain way. That's the kind of specific thing that Zizek's talking about. So capitalism and consumerism. So this is an example of the enlightened false consciousness in our current context, in the capitalist world we're in. Many people today know that capitalism is exploitative and that consumerism is often wasteful. We know this. Everyone says this. Everyone knows this. So many documentaries, we're aware of this, right? Despite this awareness, they still buy into it, continuing to consume, working exploitative jobs, and participate in a system they openly critique. They might justify it with phrases like, yes, I know money doesn't buy happiness, but still, dot, dot, dot. I know fast fashion is unethical, but it's cheap and convenient. So there's so many examples you can take from it, right? Like in my current job, like I work in the tractor business. So I work at Fendt and Macy Ferguson. It's pretty big tractor company, like worldwide in America, etc. But technically, if you get into the minutiae, the parts that we get in order to build those tractors, obviously outsourced from China, or it's exploitative labor. So when you get into any sort of that side of things, it's like very hard to then accept or be working or supporting that, right? Because they're obviously exploiting workers and warehouse workers, all that sort of stuff. So, but like, what can like is that a disconnect for me to think about? It's like, okay, does that mean I should find something that is definitely a bit more quote unquote ethical, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of things that I can even look at in my own personal life and think, okay, what am I doing wrong? What can I do better? Is this the right way to go about it? But I'm still participating in the system, even though I don't agree with that way of thinking. So I think that's my enlightened false consciousness. But in saying that, my previous job was even worse than this. So I'm not directly involved with, I guess, the production side as much as I was in my previous job. My previous job, I was like in the food manufacturing, and it's even worse because I actually literally like I can walk downstairs and I can see all the migrant workers they're exploiting, like that's another, but we can I know this, I'm doing this, I'm having these conversations with people and I'm understanding the degree of the exploitation that is conducted when I was doing my previous job. But like I'm still partaking in it, so that's my enlightened false consciousness, right? Um, so this is in the case of politics. People may not believe in political systems, but they continue voting or participating in them because that's just how things are. It's like this is straight away like you connect it to Muslim vote matters. Like if you use this understanding of intelligent false consciousness, you can open up a lot of conversations about the Muslim voting bloc. It's like, are you saying that you believe in the system inherently because you are partaking directly in the system? I understand the sympathy of like us trying to forge our own path, but you're doing that within the confines of democracy. Is that the most effective way to go about it? Like, is that going to get us the best, because if you don't even believe in democracy either, like you know that Islamically we aren't meant to partake in the way that we do. And even in saying that, like the two-party system is not going to really alleviate, like there's always going to be contradictions, there's always going to be issues that we can't really address because of the powers that be. It's a lot more, it's way more powerful than what we even can do about it. Like, you have ties with Israel. It doesn't matter about like our personal like lobbying at some point, right? It's about what the government benefits from economically, within the military side of things, all this sort of stuff, right? So like, so if we want to fight back at the system, is the thing that we do is partake in the system even more? That doesn't make sense, right? Personally, it doesn't make sense. And I know many people in my sort of camp sort of echo the same things, and I learn from them in terms of the angles that they take from it, but that's something to really factor in. So something to ask them because I actually don't know. Like I don't understand if this might be their rationale. Like this is just the thing, how things are. We're just in a democratic country and we are just having to utilize what we have as tools, and therefore we're doing that. Or maybe they have an implicit belief that if the Muslim community can mobilize within the confines of democracy, somehow we can get our way. So I don't know if it's the one or the other. Maybe just like, oh, these are the tools. So if it's like, we know that democracy is problematic, So they have the enlightened false consciousness, but then they still are just like, okay, this is all we can do, so we're just gonna do it. That is enlightened false consciousness. Or they actually believe in the system that if we mobilize enough, it will work. Then that's probably even worse, right? Like you don't want to put your faith on a free democratic system, right? So I don't know. I think there's mixed opinions about that, but do you have any thoughts on that? I don't know if you've interacted with people specifically. I'm a bit of an outsider when it comes to this.
Yeah, same tandem. I'm sort of on the periphery, just seeing what's happening. At least with the political sphere, I'm not a political person. I'm just a observer like many others. But yeah, I do see the problem nature of participating in this system that clearly, no matter what has been done in the past, and I feel whatever we try to do in the future by participating in it is not does not have does not even consider the Muslim community at all. Like the Muslim community is what 2 to 3% of Australia, if I'm not mistaken, something like that, which is a few 100,000 or something like that, which is huge, but it's still not represented in the way that it should. So, um, yeah, that's just what I can say. But I just wanted to touch on also the consumerism or the capitalism sort of thing, and I've been having that just to add to that point. Um, that go through my mind this week because I've been fitting out my library, and I'm just like, is I'm buying a lot of stuff from IKEA, and whether or not they source it ethically, and if it's stuff like that. So those thoughts really did come through my mind, and I'm like, I really want to do the right thing, but when I'm
Yeah,
purchasing stuff, so try to be conscious in that respect. Yeah,
I mean, at least we're making a step of trying to be conscious. As people are just like in the different world. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, I definitely, but sort of there's that trust that came in. I'm like, well, they're a worldwide brand, so and they're Swedish, so I'm hoping they, because a lot of good things come out of Sweden. I'll give them full credit. I'm hoping that it's ethical manufacturing. Yeah, but yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, like I think Zizek's enlightened false consciousness is a very powerful concept that we can really talk about at length because I think it's summarized so many different things. And also like all else that we talked about deconstruction, talked about Foucauldian power, like all these tools or these concepts allows us to unpack our realities a lot deeper. Because you can't really like, I wouldn't say you just study Islam, fiqh, hadith, Quran, Sirah, right? And then it's somehow you understand. Like I wouldn't understand the society this way if I didn't read this sort of stuff, honestly, right? Like you wouldn't be understanding the mechanisms or the way that society operates and how we should be aware as Muslims, right? Or navigating this world, right? So for me, I think it's very helpful to have that understanding personally. So Zizek's point is that modern ideology works not by making us ignorant, which is really a key point. It's not making us ignorant, but by allowing us to be fully aware while ensuring our compliance. The real power of ideology is in making resistance feel pointless or impossible. That's so like, I'm just like, wow. And I didn't have time, but I was going to make a post on my Instagram. I reactivated Instagram for, I think last week. I was going to make this post something like to do with this on my story. Such a key point. Like the fact that we just kind of go about it and accept it is what I guess the powers that be want us to do. Because the more people accept that it's just not going to work, this is all we have. We just got to use these tools that we have at hand, which is, I guess, the Western democratic system. Then the longer obviously it will take for us to achieve what we need to achieve, right? So it's something to really understand and sort of back to Foucauldian power, where every moment we can speak to power, like it's making that step to really speak back to power and try to utilize that. Like obviously for every temperament it's going to be difficult. Maybe the cleric find a lot easier to speak their mind, whatever. But I think it's something that all of us should work towards. Like I know even for myself, like I do moments where I don't expect someone like says something in a certain way, especially in a group setting. I tend to play a bit of a people pleasing role in those situations, and something that I'm trying to not do because it's like you're just accepting the status quo, you're letting them be, and you're not questioning them and sort of making impact. So that's for something even like for me to even in like work in the workplace and whatnot, whenever something comes up. But something for me to also be mindful of, inshallah. So okay, so many more examples. Many Muslims know, okay, this is more the Islamic capitalist angle to the Enlightened False Consciousness. Because it was only mentioned like half a page, so I'm like, we need to talk about this at length, yes, because there's so many examples, because obviously I'm not going to cover in the book Muslim angles. So many Muslims know that Islamic teachings warn against riba, interest, materialism, and economic injustice, yet they still engage with them. It's really pertinent point, right? A common issue. I know riba is haram, but what else? How else can I buy a house? So it's like, okay, that is the enlightened false consciousness, and something I've. So when we talk about critical race theory, I've said it a lot of times where it's like, obviously we have specific Muslim struggles, but because all of us, especially minorities, are um, we are beholden to the democratic system. We're beholden to secularism, liberalism, liberal ideas. We have to engage with them. We have to work within it, right? Because that's what the government's enforced, right? We are going to experience parallel. We're going to. I don't know if that's right. We're going to experience parallel experiences with other groups, not just Muslims, right? There's going to be, I don't know, Indians that relate to a lot of the struggles we have. There's going to be Mexicans and this and that, right? Like, I don't, have you seen Mo, by the way? It came out, the show, Mo on Netflix.
No, I've seen it, but I think I've seen some good reviews about it,
Yeah,
apparently. Yeah.
season two. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Like the last episode, like so emotional. Like I don't think I've seen a show that it touched my heart like that, especially the last episode of season two. Like that kind of speaks to her, right? Like he goes through like gets deported. He tries to work within the system to get migration or get citizenship. All these sort of struggles he has. It's not only limited to I guess the Islamic or the Muslim. It's going to be also Mexicans and all the other people going to experience all that struggles, right? So all these other groups are going to experience, and they've all written literature and text around this, right? Because CRT promotes the idea of storytelling, and that's really important, right? So that is something that we need to make understand more of. And there, like going back to the point we're talking about enlightened false consciousness, like this idea also exists in so many other groups, not just ourselves, right? Obviously there's gonna be leftists that don't agree with the system. They'll have similar views to us or whatnot, right? So anyways, this reflects Zizek's critique of modern ideology. Capitalism has become so dominant that even those who oppose it feel powerless to escape it. Islamic perspective, this aligns with the idea of dunya versus akhirah, where people know what is right but are still caught up in the world's temptations. SubhanAllah. So I think that's a very good example to link to the Quran as well. We can also say, okay, maybe the enlightened false consciousness exists indirectly within the Quran, or make that connection too, right? Some governments in the Muslim world claim to uphold Islamic values, yet they embrace capitalism, tourism, and neoliberal policies, right? I don't mention the states that do that, but that's pretty pertinent. Gulf countries build massive luxury cities despite Islamic teachings on modesty and simplicity. I know Islamic teachings discourage excess wealth, but economic growth is important, which is really interesting, right? So Islamic perspective, this raises a deeper question. Is the modern Muslim world Islamic in practice or just in name? A lot of Muslims will see that like, oh, we need to build wealth, we need to do this and that. Like, I'm sure we do in in the way that they may want it to happen, but it's a lot deeper than that, right? Like sometimes we don't want to. There was actually a conversation on Twitter. This was like months ago. Like, oh, we need a Muslim. What's that? In America, there's Silicon Valley. It's like we need a Muslim Silicon Valley. I'm like, bro, like, okay, I get your point. You want to be technologically advanced, this and that, but like, they only do it for the money, right? They're making immense wealth. Like, if that's our objective, like, what's the point? Like, you have to think a little deeper than that. Our ends is obviously want to revive Islam to some degree, but as Muslim Silicon Valley isn't gonna have that ends possibly, right? It's gonna be a bit more different, right? It's be wealth generation for what, like living a certain lifestyle. I don't know. So, Islamic perspective, this raises a deeper question. Is the modern Muslim world Islamic in practice or just in name? So it's something we always talk about, like, it's like, oh, the West, people come to the West, but then they're like, we need to do hijrah, but then it's like, okay, we do hijrah to the Muslim countries, but they're not that Muslim either. Yeah, they have the Quran, the Adhan playing aloud and all these other mosques, and maybe a little easier for Muslims, but is that as different from, I don't know, living in Auburn? No, you know what I mean? Or like in Lakemba, right? So sometimes it's, yeah, like, it's like how Islamic are our Islamic countries. Because a lot of, even ideas in terms of like atheism exists within even Bangladesh, my home country, right? A lot of people are apostating too, right? Anyway, so Islamic influences and halal hustle. Social media influencers use Islamic branding to sell courses, coaching, business advice, often mirroring capitalistic self-help culture. Some preach simplicity and spirituality while promoting high-priced Islamic success programs. People know this is just capitalism wrapped in Islamic branding, but still follow these influences. I know Islam discourages excess wealth obsession, but making money is part of halal risk, right? Islamic perspective, this raises questions about niyyah. Are these influences promoting Islamic values or just monetizing them? Very important. Okay, there's more. Okay, so this is probably the last slide on enlightened false consciousness. But I've just given a lot of examples to understand the concept from. Like it was initially about the Soviet Union, Soviet Republic, but then now, sort of how it is can be seen within the Islamic tradition or in our own lives, within society, etc. Something to understand. So I know I still do it. Rituals without okay, so I know, but I still do it. Rituals without conviction. In many Muslim societies, some individuals practice religious ritual prayers, fasting, wearing Islamic attire, but not because they genuinely believe, but because of social pressure, habit, and cultural identity. Someone might say, I know I don't believe in Islam, but I still fast in Ramadan because my family expects it. I don't have strong faith, but I wear hijab because of my social environment. That could be tied to Foucauldian power, like you have a invisible watchtower looking over you, expecting you to dress a certain way, even though you don't have a strong faith. It's kind of not understanding what faith really is, like following, like the reason for doing that. But anyways, this aligns with Zizek's cynical distance. The person knows they don't fully believe, yet they continue acting as if they do, right? So it's just like, I don't know, you're just doing the action without the actual intention, right? So in perspective, this relates to nifaq, hypocrisy, where external actions don't match the internal belief. Quran warns against those who only outwardly practice Islam for social reasons, which is really important. So you can make that connection. Enlightened false consciousness is a nifaq as well in the Islamic context. I don't know. To some degree, it might be. Even for, like I said, with my job, is it hypocrisy? It probably is to some degree, right? Probably not as bad from a theological standpoint, but I don't know, something to think about. And that's what I mean. Like we need to talk about it from that lens more often as a community. We don't really address that, like our actions and how they influence and how Islamic we're really being and understanding, I guess, the society we're in. So grand, okay, so that's that for enlightened false consciousness. So yeah, that's why I was pretty keen because we did the sublime concept of sublime and enlightened false consciousness. I thought those are really two important points that we need to really touch on.